This lecture is going to be on respiratory anatomy. And so when we breathe, we want to breathe through our nose. Keep your mouth shut. You don't usually breathe through your mouth unless your nasal passages are swollen, like mine, all through allergy season. But we start with the nostril, or your nares, and air will flow through your nostril into your nasal cavity. So this just shows one side, and the air goes through the nostril cavity and then through the region called the pharynx, and the pharynx is the other term for your throat. And air will go through your pharynx and then enter into the region called the larynx. And this region through the larynx, we know we're in the larynx when we reach this region called the epiglottis. And then we know we're out of the larynx when we see this big region here. This is hyaline cartilage on either side of the larynx that leads into the region called the trachea. This long windpipe here is your trachea, which is held open by these cartilaginous rings that are actually C-shaped here. And the trachea ends at a region called the carina. This region here called the carina, this pointed area here, the carina of the trachea. And it branches into the bronchi of the lungs. So this primary bronchus is a big air tube going this way, and here's another primary bronchus going that way. And so here we have our lungs that sit atop the diaphragm, this big bell-shaped muscle here. And this is showing the diaphragm in a relaxed position. So if the diaphragm contracts, it's going to flatten out and pull our lungs downward. So our lungs sit in our thoracic cavity. So this is your whole thoracic cavity up here, and each lung will sit in a pleural cavity. So here's a pleural cavity, here's a pleural cavity, and in the center of the thoracic cavity, in this region, in the mediastinum, we'd have the superior mediastinum, and down here would be in this lower mediastinal area is the pericardial cavity. So here is where your heart would lie, and the heart has been removed. So we see that there's a notch here. This is called the cardiac notch that takes away some of the area of your left lung. The left lung is smaller than the right lung. We'll see in the right lung we have 3 lobes to the right lung, the superior, the middle, and the inferior lobe, whereas the left lung we only have 2 lobes, the superior and the inferior lobe. And the superior and the middle and the inferior lobe are separated by 2 fissures over here. This is our horizontal fissure, and this is the oblique fissure on this side, and this is the oblique fissure on the left lung. So these are just the organs of the respiratory system. We'll get into specifics on the next slide or subsequent slides. If I can turn the slide, we'll see. There we go. So this is just the external nose, and we can ignore this epicranius frontal belly. This is just the muscle underneath, deep to the skin here. But in the root or the bridge of the nose, the root is right between the eyebrows, and the bridge would be where you sit your glasses. The dorsum nasi would be this ridge that runs along here to the end of the nose, which we call the apex. The flared regions on each side of the nostril, or the nares, these flared regions that you might get pierced if you were so inclined, those would be called the ali of the nose. Ala would be singular. So a nostril is a nares. If we put an E here and replace that I, those would be nares, those nose holes that would lead up into your nasal cavities. And the philtrum is this region that goes all in this area right here above the lip. That is your philtrum. Notice the outside of your nose is made up mostly of hyaline cartilage that gives support. That hyaline cartilage is inferior to your nasal bones. Now the side of your nasal or your nose is made up of the maxillary bone. So the maxillary bone goes up to the nasal bone, and then you have that hyaline cartilage. And the ali of the nose is made of dense fibrous connective tissue for support. Anything else I want to mention here? I think that's enough, except for the left and right nasal cavities internal in the inside of the nose. On the external portion of the nose, if we want to separate left and right halves of the nose, is made of hyaline cartilage. But if we go deep in there, realize that you've got the vomer in there. The vomer is made of dense fibrous connective tissue for support. Anything else I want to mention here? I think that's enough, except for the left and right nasal cavities internal in the inside of the nose. On the external portion of the nose, if we want to separate left and right halves of the nose, is made of hyaline cartilage. But if we go deep in there, down below inferiorly that's going to fuse superiorly with the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. And if you have to go back a couple of chapters to review how the vomer and the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone fuse, please do. It's just a close-up view. If we were to remove the vomer, which would be down here, and the perpendicular plate, which would be up here, and that hyaline cartilage, that would be right here. In other words, if we were to remove the nasal septum, this is what we would see. This would be the outer wall. This would be the lateral side of this nasal cavity. And we would see three little bumps. So when we would breathe in air through our nares, the air would come in and it would circulate in this fashion before it would go down into the pharynx. These three bumps make sure that the air circulates in this way. And the three bumps are called the conchae. This is the superior nasal concha, the middle nasal concha, and the inferior nasal concha. Conchae, if we added an E on the end, that's what we would make it plural. This little groove here under each concha is called a meatus, the superior, middle, and inferior nasal meatuses. So it's kind of busy the way that they labeled it. But these conchae and meatuses, this just ensures when the air comes in here that it creates a turbulent flow before the air goes down into the pharynx. All of this nasal cavity is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells. And those goblet cells secrete a mucus, and so when the air comes in, it traps all of that dirty particles, etc., and at the same time it filters that air. And the cilia beats all of that stuff backwards to the back of your throat. This region here is called the posterior nasal aperture, and that cilia is going to brush all the dirty, nasty air back this way. Well, the air is just going to flow back here, but any debris that's trapped in the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium is going to beat back this way, so that it's going to be just swallowed every time you swallow down your pharynx and into your stomach. It's a good way to cleanse the air so we don't breathe in those dirty particles, but rather we just swallow them. And the moisture created by the mucus helps to humidify the air. Notice in this region here we have hair. That's called fibrissae, and that helps to prevent, bugs from crawling up your nose and any others. Let's just go with bugs. Prevents bugs from crawling up your nose. That's good enough. All of this region that's covered by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, we would call that your respiratory mucosa. Up here, where it's labeled olfactory epithelium, we would call this region, we would say that it's covered with olfactory mucosa, because this is the region where our olfactory nerves are coming down from our brain. We have olfactory tracts that come along here, up here, and when they reach the region, let me get to the next picture. When they reach the region right here, this is the cribriform plate, and in that cribriform plate we have these little holes. That plate is right here. We have little holes called olfactory foramina, and the olfactory nerves come down through here, and when we smell, air comes up through here, and those olfactory nerves pick up that sensation and take that to our brain, to the region of our brain where we smell. So we would call this our olfactory mucosa up there in that region. Not too much more to point out in this region. Now in this region here, we have our pharyngotympanic tube, because it's in the region of the pharynx, and this leads up to our tympanic membrane. This is the region where we equalize pressure with our tympanic membrane, or our, I can never think of the name of the tympanic membrane, our eardrum. We equalize pressure with our eardrum in this region right here. It's also called our auditory tube. This is the opening to our auditory tube, or it's the opening to the eustachian tube. So if you have a cold or any other infection, this is how you get the infection spreading to your ear in this region. This tubal tonsil is going around the opening to this auditory tube, and anytime you have a tonsil, like right here, and in this region here, and at the base of the tongue, these tonsils are lines of defense because if you have infection, etc., these are where your lymphocytes are going to be in these regions where your tonsils are located. Let's go to a better picture. This picture is highlighting the regions of your pharynx. So in this picture we see the three regions of the pharynx, the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx is the region of the pharynx that's located up in the nasal cavity. In this region, in the nasopharynx, air is the only thing that's going to go through the nasopharynx. Just air. So air goes through this region only. Because we don't have any scraping of food or anything else, this region in the nasopharynx is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Some things I want to point out about the nasopharynx is that we have these tonsils right here in the nasopharynx. These are your adenoids or your pharyngeal tonsils. So that's a point of entrance for your nasopharynx. Also, we have this opening to the auditory tube located here in the nasopharynx. Remember, that's equalizing pressure to your tympanic membrane. It leads up to the tympanic membrane. And our tubal tonsils are also located here in our nasopharynx. So your nasopharynx is an interesting place. And from here to here, we call this the posterior nasal aperture, or we can do it right where this red line is. The posterior nasal aperture. It's just the entrance into the throat, if you will. The air is going to come back through here, and it's going to enter your throat through the posterior nasal aperture in this region. The oropharynx is a passageway not only for air, because air comes down through here, but it's also a passageway for food, because food enters into our mouth and we chew it and then we swallow it. So in the oropharynx, we no longer want pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium in this region. In this region of the oropharynx here, we want it to be lined with stratified squamous epithelium. So we switch over to stratified squamous epithelium because that is a protective epithelial coating here. Points of interest in our oropharynx would include these tonsils, which are your palatine tonsils, and your lingual tonsils at the base of the tongue. This is your tongue here. It's a big muscle. There are lots of muscles in here. It's just not your tongue muscle. But this is the lingual tonsil, and here are your palatine tonsils. And this thing right here, this is your uvula hanging down from the soft palate. So your soft palate would be right here, and this is your uvula. Your uvula will swing back when you swallow and close off the nasopharynx, so food doesn't go up into your nasal cavity when you swallow. Your laryngopharynx starts when we get in front of the larynx. So it too is a common passageway for not only food, because food is going to go down this pathway, but also air. So we still want this lined with stratified squamous epithelium as well. So up here we had pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, but then we have to switch over to stratified squamous, and we continue on with the stratified squamous. And then as we go down the throat, we'll still have stratified squamous because there would be food going this way, but air is going to go this way, so we're going to get to switch back to pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium as soon as we get down into this larynx. It will be stratified squamous, by the way, in this top part of the larynx, but as soon as we get past this little line here, we'll switch over to pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So we're just stratified in this region right here where we may come into contact with some food if we're a little unlucky. So your laryngopharynx is just the region in front of your larynx, and there's not really anything remarkable to show you in this region. Now on this picture I would like to point out that you know enough anatomy now that you should know all of your bones. You should know all your different types of cartilages. You should know that the nose is made of hyaline cartilage. You should know that your vertebral disc, these types of cartilages here, are made of fibrocartilage. You should know that your epiglottis, only your ears and your epiglottis are made of elastic cartilage, and that these cartilages here are these guys are made out of, they're called your respiratory cartilages, so these guys are made out of hyaline cartilage. So we've got hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and up here this is hyaline cartilage again. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant cartilage in your body. And you should know all your bones. This is your mandible. This is the maxilla here. And as we go back on the hard palate, the maxilla turns into the palatine bone right here. And then this is your hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is the only bone in the body that doesn't articulate with any other bone. It just attaches to some neck muscles that are involved with swallowing and your tongue and some other muscles. These are your cervical vertebrae. And then we go up. This is the sphenoid bone, and we know this because we see the sella turcica here. And this is your sphenoid sinus. And then here's the ethmoid bone, and you know this because we see the cribriform plate with those olfactory foramina. And then we have your frontal bone. You know this is the frontal bone because we see a big frontal sinus, especially if you get sinus headaches there. You know this is the frontal bone, and this is your nasal bone right here. So you know all these bones. Okay. So all those bones stay the same on this picture. This is going to be an important picture for you to know on Lab Practical Day. All these little different pieces and parts. So I know this says soft palate, goes soft palate and then down into the uvula. I think we've been over most all of these parts. Let's see if we've not gone over anything. The term vestibule. This is your nostril or your nares. The vestibule is the area of the nose right inside the nares that would be covered in the vibrissae, the hair. And I always tell students that the vestibule is the area where you could stick a pea and it would just stay there, but don't stick peas up your nose. That would be horrible because if it gets stuck, then I don't want to be responsible for that. That's for sure. Okay, let's see. The isthmus of the fauces would be the opening into the oral cavity. That's another place to know of the oropharynx. Now, when we get into the larynx, we're going to start talking about the larynx on the next slide. I'm sure the larynx is coming up. Things to know about your larynx would be that the epiglottis is the covering to the larynx. It closes off, it's a switching station. It closes off your larynx when you swallow. So when you get food in your mouth, anytime you swallow, this larynx is going to go up and the epiglottis closes the larynx off. So food goes from your mouth down into the oropharynx, then down into the laryngopharynx, and at this point the epiglottis closes over this glottis. The glottis is the hole. So the epiglottis closes off and food goes from the oropharynx to the laryngopharynx and then into the esophagus down this way to the stomach. If you don't swallow, when you don't swallow, everything goes from your nose down through the nasopharynx to the oropharynx to the laryngopharynx, and it goes this pathway to the larynx down the trachea. So the difference between food going this way and this way is whether you swallow or not. Swallow, stuff's going to go to your stomach. Don't swallow, things are going to go to your lungs. Now, this is your epiglottis from the side. This is showing you a big flap of elastic cartilage. And these two things right here, these vestibular folds are really they're helpers. They close off the vocal folds. They help your vocal folds to close. And your vocal folds are straps of elastic fibers that are stretched across your larynx here. And as air rushes up through your trachea, it vibrates your vocal folds so we can make speech. We can make sound, I should say. Your thyroid gland is the gland that we went over in the endocrine system that's in charge of metabolism. This biggest cartilage here, this biggest cartilage that's involved with your larynx is called your thyroid cartilage because it's above your thyroid. And the cricoid cartilage wraps around gets to the other side, and it's large from the back and very small in the front. But it's the last part of the larynx before we're going to get down into the windpipe, which is the trachea. So this is your view of the larynx. On the superior part, it's the superior part of the larynx, and this is where the larynx is going to end, and here we have our trachea. So notice we have this hyoid bone up here, and this is the tippy part of the epiglottis, the part that would close off the top, and this is our big thyroid cartilage. Now this is how you should recognize the larynx. There's going to be a part of your thyroid cartilage that enlarges, especially if you're a male, because of testosterone, and it's called the laryngeal prominence. Don't call it the Adam's apple. You know it's the Adam's apple, but don't call it the Adam's apple. This is the laryngeal prominence right here. So this is what your larynx looks like from the outside, and it has this big cricoid cartilage underneath your thyroid cartilage. So here is your larynx. Notice our hyoid. Now this is what it looks like from the side if you cut open. And here are our vestibular folds. Now these are our false vocal cords because they're not going to make sound. Your true vocal cords or vocal folds are right here, and they're what actually produces sound. And the arytenoid cartilages right here are attached to our vocal folds, and they move back and forth and pull these vocal folds tight, and that's what causes them to change in pitch and etc. So as air comes up from your lungs and hits these vocal folds, it's going to produce a variety of sounds, pitches, etc. Now the loudness of your voice depends on how much air is coming up through your vocal folds. If we whisper, our vocal folds don't move at all. But if we push a lot of air up through our vocal folds, our voices are going to be very loud. The pitch and how our voice sounds is going to depend on how we stretch these vocal folds. Now, voice quality depends a lot on how, your skull is shaped, your nasal cavity, lots of things like that. That's just horrible looking. Just showing you the cartilage, all the cartilage that's involved in your larynx. Now, if we're looking down on the vocal fold, here's the base of the tongue. These are your vocal folds closed. So you would have to, if you look down the trachea into the lungs, here's what it looks like if we open them. And so what you need to realize is that this is actually a hole leading down into your lungs. And so the hole is called a glottis. This is the glottis closed, this is the glottis open. So when we push air up through this glottis and we vibrate these vocal folds right here in white, they're white because there is no blood going through your vocal folds. These are just elastic fibers being stretched through here. When we vibrate the vocal folds, that's what causes noise. By the way, here are vestibular folds on either side. They just help the vocal folds close. So we have to have our glottis open and air rushing past our vocal cords for sound to be produced. If air rushes up and hits a closed glottis, it sounds more like a hiccup or a cough. That's what that sounds like. By the way, the epiglottis is called the epiglottis. Here's our epiglottis. It's a weird looking structure from this point of view. But the epiglottis is called the epiglottis because it's upon the glottis. It covers up the hole. You don't want a hot dog going through this hole because it's going to go down into your trachea and block your windpipe. Okay, we're going to do trachea and lung anatomy on the next lecture.